Good afternoon, everyone, from Handha Pawb. So my name is Robert Chapman, and I'm going to attempt to move swiftly through 24 slides that capture at a high level the relevance of property and how it can make a difference to accelerating growth. The content or the agenda is before you as we speak, and I'm going to speak to those various elements. Okay, so who am I? Well, indeed, who am I? I'm a chartered surveyor with 35 years post-qualification experience, who has developed a niche as an independent strategic property advisor to businesses. I've got the benefit of a leadership program from Cardiff University in the early 2000s, and actually for 3 years between 2012 and 15, I was a member of the Business Wales Strategy Board, which at that time reported to the former Assembly member Edwina Hart, which formulated the Business Wales Support Programme. Okay, so what do you know about commercial property? And that's an open question to all the attendees. And by the way, what I would just ask or invite you to do is, if you have a pen and paper handy, if you could just scribble some notes down as I pose some questions through this presentation. And if I could also just equally invite you to participate in some active listening, because there are certain parts of this where I will be talking a lot and seeking your active listening. I've used this phrase, borrowed this phrase from Donald Rumsfeld, and it seems entirely apposite to me because, you know, as he put it, there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, but there are also unknown unknowns. And dare I say, over the years, I have come across a whole range of businesses, and I'm talking about from 1990 onwards, quite honestly, who've been doing things around property without taking advice, and I've been surprised, sometimes shocked. Let me just give you a few examples, if I may, where organisations have not taken advice. So, and I'm just going to skate through these very quickly. But there was the organisation that missed a break clause in its lease. And what did that mean for them? Well, they had to pay an extra 3 years rent of £250,000 per annum for a property that they were forced to continue to occupy because there was a contractual limit or contractual agreement. There was then the organisation that MD at MD-FD level agreed to a lease with an escalating rent. And basically, the contractual lease liability with an escalating rent of 5.5 million was greater than, in fact, the freehold value of the property at 3.25 million, and it was putting 200 jobs in jeopardy. There was then the small SME who were looking to secure some office space, about 1,300 square feet. They agreed terms without reference to seeking any advice, that unknown scenario, and that lease came to an end. I actually proved to that organisation with evidence that over the course of their lease they had thrown away, dare I say, £100,000. Now that's a significant sum of money, I would suggest. And then there was the landowner who had sort of 5 acres of land and didn't know what to do, didn't know why there was limited interest in the land. Well, that was because it was, adjacent to a floodplain, and it was completely covered with Japanese knotweed. So, these are just instances of things that I've come across. And dare I say, more recently, as someone with a business consultancy background in an organization looking to expand, they're potentially committing to a contractual lease of 20 years with a rent alone commitment of circa 3 million, and yet they're not taking advice. Okay, property's place in your strategy, and where does it sit in your strategy? That's a rhetorical question, but you might want to write down where actually property does sit in your strategy vis-a-vis your your business plan. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, and maybe this is the element or the part where I'm seeking a little bit of active listening, because I'm going to refer to a number of pieces of research which help to underscore not only my personal view, but it underscores the objectivity of what I'm attempting to say. So there was a piece of research, dare I say, as far back as '93 by Norse and Rulak. And this is what they had to say. Just as it is inappropriate to specify a company's strategy for its real estate decisions without consideration of its primary business strategy, so also is it inappropriate to make a particular real estate decision or decisions without considering that company's real estate strategy. In practice, this is the reality. Few companies are explicit in articulating their real estate strategies, and therefore real estate operating decisions tend to get made in a vacuum. And one could say, well, how far-sighted were they? Because scroll forward to 2002, there was a piece of research prepared or undertaken by Roger Bootle, a leading economist, and he was with Capital Economics at the time. And here are some of his findings. I'm not going to read those out. You can read those at your leisure. But effectively, he was underscoring the fact that property does tend to be the Cinderella of business strategy. And this is from a leading economist. And dare I say, just scroll forward to 2003. There was a piece of research by a gentleman by the name of Organ who did an analysis of property transactions. And at that time, he was saying over 100,000 commercial property transactions that take place every year. Under 50% of corporate organizations have taken property advice. Now, if you then apply that to SMEs, which form the backbone of any economy, that was greater than 75% of organizations that were not taking property advice from the likes of someone like me to give them a steer on the way forward. And he went on then to sort of I'm going back again to Roger Bootle, and he went on to refer to various other things. Few companies integrate property into their corporate strategy, et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, I'm not going to read those bullet points out verbatim. I think they speak for themselves. And Neil, I think the presentation is going to be available anyway, so people can peruse at their leisure. But Roger Bootle, this leading economist, revisited his research undertaken in 2002. He revisited it again in the autumn of 2008. And this is what he had to say. Since the publication of our original Waste of Space report in 2002, we estimate that firms in the UK have taken action which has resulted in annual property-related cost savings of about 1% of GDP, equivalent to around 15 billion. But more can be done, and we estimate that savings of about 1% of GDP per year are still up for grabs. There was further research then in 2009 by Morris, Levy and Dong. And they said, whether a company's underlying motivations are primarily for mobility or stability seems to influence their choice of whether to own or lease premises. For companies that require the long-term stability, as alluded to previously, ownership is seen as a bonus. However, for businesses that require being mobile, then leasing is seen as the tenure of choice. And there was some research in 2011 by the RICS. And just a couple of the findings. Many SMEs are reluctantly become property owners in reality to secure funds for growth, as banks only lend on tangible assets. And so the other key point coming out of that was that stakeholders need a solid understanding of property, because it involves strategic decisions with huge implications for many enterprises. And so it represents a cost second only to the payroll, and in some cases constitutes a major investment. And dare I say, my own research in 2014, so you can see that I've been working in this arena for quite some time, but my own research, and again, I'm just going to give you some high-level points here, but based on a literature review, reference to the property asset in the business plan tended to be cursory. That was what I found. I wasn't surprised by it. But then there was also the reference made to accountants and solicitors. Now, I have a healthy respect for those professions, and indeed, the majority of those professionals, but not when they give advice on property from behind a desk without reference to a surveyor. The accountant, dare I say, there are some accountants who typically just tend to boil things down to in terms of property, boiling it down to a number. And there are some solicitors who simply undertake the desktop exercise, which is what they do anyway, in codifying a contractual document without any particular knowledge of the physical asset in the marketplace. So what I am simply suggesting then is that there is a key role for the surveyor in providing strategic advice, and it's a question then of businesses understanding that role and engaging to take that advice. So if I go back to this particular section, this is my attempt in this slide to articulate in a visual sense the role of property in helping to deliver business objectives. I'm not going to read out those 18 points because you can see them and read them at your leisure, but they all then link through under the umbrella, dare I say, of sustainability, which captures the strategic, financial, and operational drivers. And there's one additional point I'd just like to make here, and maybe I pose it as a rhetorical question. What do businesses think about the productivity of property? And you might think that's a very odd thing to say. Cardiff Metropolitan University undertook some research into productivity in businesses in 2019. I made a contribution to that research, and I actually suggested to them that they shouldn't forget property, because property can make a difference in terms of the productivity of businesses. And what was interesting in their research, they found that nearly 75% of those businesses, SMEs that were interviewed in their research, said that they did not specifically measure the productivity of their operational space. 75%. And yet, if you think about particularly enhanced or exacerbated by the pandemic that we've thought more about where we live and the space we occupy and all those sorts of things. And space can make a difference to our well-being and indeed to our productivity. And of course, that was underscored by a significant piece of research by the World Health Organization, who dare I say, devoted a significant 131-page report to healthy workplaces, and with an opening quote which basically said, "It is unethical and short-sighted business practice to compromise the health of workers for the wealth of enterprises." And so, I posed the question again: where does property sit in your strategy? I move on. What do you know about your current property? You may be in a current property right now. Well, what do you know about it? Have you carried out a property audit? And you might think, oh, what's that all about? Well, we make, I would suggest, informed decisions by understanding data, the data that we possess, which can then influence the decisions. So, what data does exist when it comes to property, vis-a-vis, the physical data, legal data, financial data, efficiency data, and it leads on to a range of questions. Is the property in the right place? Is the size and composition appropriate? What is the cost to put it right and cost to maintain? Can title be proven? Are there any restrictive covenants or lease restrictions? How is the space used? Is it used effectively? Is it functionally efficient for its purpose? Are the valuations appropriate and current? What about town planning considerations and local authority policy? I can go on, but that those are some of the considerations that ought to be thought about, and that's why again I invite you to write down what you know about your current property. This is a question that I think is relevant. What is the carbon footprint of your property? And you may look at me askance. Well, I mean, I hope not, to be fair, because there's context here. We have a declared climate emergency. The Climate Change Act was amended to bring all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. Most major UK cities have now declared that they will be carbon neutral earlier than 2050. Investors require assets to measure CSR requirements vis-a-vis GRESB, which was formerly the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, and the likes of the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices and the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. These are things that really are coming to the fore, and I've noticed that in particular with the last 18 to 24 months. By the way, according to the RICS or RICS research, the UK business sector, and there are business people in the room, is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for 30.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions in 2010. And indeed, it was the report by the Centre for Alternative Technology, based in Mahuntla, who are experts in this field, entitled Zero Carbon Britain 2030 report, and where they stated that the use of buildings represents 44% of UK emissions. And indeed, if that's then combined with estimates for construction and maintenance, that shows that the building sector alone is responsible for 64% of carbon emissions. So, I pose the question again, what is the carbon footprint of your property? Now, you may well be in existing properties, and here I've just tried to articulate through a visual, how one might sort of consider integrating net zero carbon methodology into the operations for your property. And it's worth just saying that the UK Green Building Council, who are a fount of knowledge on this matter, define net zero when it comes to operational properties as this: when the amount of carbon emissions associated with the building's operational energy on an annual basis is zero or negative. A net zero carbon building is highly energy efficient and powered from on-site and or off-site renewable energy sources, with any remaining carbon balance offset. And of course, this net zero carbon methodology applies to the entirety of the property life cycle, whether it's acquisition, or construction, lease, operations, or indeed disposal. This is a slide. There's probably too much information in it, but it's an extract from Hawley, who are mechanical and electrical engineers, and this states their process for decarbonisation. And I'm sharing it simply because I was a participant in something called the BASI programme, which was a Westminster government programme, and I was a participant in that programme. BASI standing, by the way, for Boosting Access for SMEs to Energy Efficiency, and that is a methodology that they adopt. This subject is important. I'm not going to dwell, but I quite like this cartoon because it says a lot. We're in the midst of COVID-19 right now. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Is there the prospect of a recession? Who knows? But let's not forget climate change is coming down the track. And it's increasingly recognized, as you can see here, the cost of inaction. This is a slide from a presentation given by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and if you're thinking about property, here's a scenario where they're talking about the impact of climate change on real estate values, property values. Relevant again, I suggest, to your thinking and strategies. The RICS also is reflecting sustainability in valuation reporting. And this is a document that I discovered recently. I've shared it with Neil, and he's welcome to share it with you as well. It's called the 1.5 degrees C Business Playbook. This is highly relevant, of course, in the year of COP26, which takes place in Glasgow later this year. And the 4 pillars define a methodology for decarbonisation. And by the way, if you're wondering, well, what on earth is this to do with property? Just look to the right-hand side of this slide, and you'll notice where buildings, property in other words, sits. It's relevant. I'm just going to touch very briefly in a high-level way on some case studies, Neil, as I move towards the end. So here's a property that where I gave advice to an AGB client to acquire. Let me just say, this is very high-level stuff, but when I engaged initially with the MD, there just wasn't an understanding. She didn't get, and she wouldn't mind me saying this actually, she didn't get what I could offer. Just didn't get it. The unknown unknowns, Donald Rumsfeld. Scroll forward. They were in an existing innovation center in several rooms. The building wasn't really performing particularly well. There were issues with it. Long story short, we looked at various options. There was a tactical negotiation. They secured this asset, and they're absolutely delighted, and so delighted that they volunteered to give a reference on LinkedIn. But that has helped that business to grow and move forward. Another AGB client, dare I say. So what you see by way of the industrial buildings, in the sort of slide there, they've secured a lease on those buildings. And long story short, they didn't know what they didn't know. And actually, it was the AGP manager who said, well, wait a minute, you're committing to something here and you haven't taken any advice. I think we better ask or invite you to have a conversation with Robert Chapman. And basically what occurred here was that I helped to save them not only 30,000 on their lease negotiation, but I actually removed a liability for the roof, which would have been a liability under a full repair and insurance lease of about £130,000. I then subsequently produced for this building here a record of condition to mitigate downstream dilapidations. In the Welsh Wind Distillery, this is an organisation. I actually introduced them, dare I say, to AGP at the very beginning of 2019. A long story short, they were operating in a space adjacent to some holiday cottages, sort of a stone's throw from this property, as it happens. And this property came on the market. It was offered as a business as a going concern. And basically, they took an initial lease of it for 12 months with an option to purchase. They purchased, and they've grown into it. And actually, we've also got planning consent on adjoining land to help them to create further capacity. And this is an organisation, by the way, that earlier this year secured a silver in the World Gin Awards, the World Gin Awards. They got a silver. So, and this is really talking about property and how it can make a difference. Dusty Knuckle, finally, but not finally, the penultimate one, acted for Dusty Knuckle. They had looked at a property in Bridge Street in Usk. I gave them advice. That advice basically was suggesting that the property that they were looking at and had been invited to engage with I didn't think was appropriate. And they decided not to proceed, because I think actually sometimes you just have to make a decision about not proceeding with the particular property. It may not be right. This property came onto the market, the former warden's bungalow, if you like, or cottage, owned by Cardiff City Council. Long story short, negotiated lease terms on this and a significant rent-free up front into the lease negotiation to reflect the work that was needed to be done. And a rent-free, as opposed to attempting to negotiate something around an improvement under the Landlord and Tenants Act 1927. They've secured that property. There's quite a large external area there, actually. And during these strange times that we live in, that could be very, very helpful right now. FSEW, Freight Systems Express Wales, a fast growth company, logistics. And this is a company who have got an ambition to move their HGVs from diesel to fully electric motor pipe. They're headquartered at the Freightliner site, but this site came on the market, sort of a 4-acre site. I'm not going to go into the detail other than to say that by the time that I was engaged to provide an analysis of this, etc., they needed a minimum 4 acres to operate from as part of giving them greater capacity. By the time the analysis was done on this site, it actually netted down to 2.5 acres, and there was a ransom strip as well. They didn't proceed. Now, what happens if they had proceeded, if they went blind and didn't take advice? It would have been a costly purchase. So I conclude, Neil, I hope I'm on time or thereabouts. My conclusion is, my conclusion is that you may want to write down the various things that I've covered in this presentation. And I'm not going to repeat those 5 actions, but other than to say that in my humble opinion, property is a key component of business and business growth, and can help to accelerate growth. And I think with those case studies I outlined quickly, those businesses are on a growth curve, and property is making a tangible difference. So I'm going to end it there, Neil.
Brilliant, thank you, Robert. That's yeah, you make a very compelling case. Obviously the importance of property, and obviously taking it seriously and including it in your strategy. So I noticed there's at least 2 companies in the room who RSP fire sprinkler systems with 35 employees looking to upsize their office space, and also hydro cutting services. Now they're 5 employees and they're looking to purchase some premises to support, grow, and store and maintain equipment. Can you give some insight into things that they can do themselves? I mean, obviously their first step should be engaging someone like yourself, but what are the things they can do themselves practically today or over the next couple of weeks to prepare themselves for either finding a newer office block or a bigger office space, or purchasing a mixed-use property?
Okay. A high-level answer, if you wish, if you will, Neil, to that question. I mean, any business, in my humble opinion, should first of all have a business plan, a game plan. So that sits there. What I'm suggesting is that property should be an integral part of that business plan. Mm-hmm. And so to reflect on your question. They may well be in an existing property. Okay, so what do you know about that property? Is it leased? Is it freehold? How is it operating? Is it fit for purpose? Is it too big? Is it too small? What are the costs associated with that property? And actually, how sustainable is it in the wider sense? Not only in terms of energy efficiency, but in terms of access to it. Is it near to public transport? Is that relevant? So I suppose there's many answers that one can give, but one thing I'm clear about, and I've experienced this, Neil, is that there are some businesses I've come across. They've been in existing property, they wanted to expand, and so I've worked with them to sort of tease out a brief, a requirement that defines their brief, and so they're focused on this property. That would be the ideal. And then I've asked the killer question at the end, and I said, well, that's great, but what about your existing property? Oh, well, we've got a lease. Okay, so if you've got a lease, you can't just extract yourself from that lease. That is a contractual commitment, and you're going to have to assign that lease, or you're going to end up with a double overhead. So it's about data, Neil. It's about and actually, I encourage businesses in my kind of, I go back to that leadership program I talked about, where I developed a sort of an intuitive approach to mentoring. I call it property mentoring in a way. And I think I would encourage businesses to understand their property and have some data. What is the planning consent for this property?
So okay, so what are some quick ways that they can access this data? So is there a methodology for doing an analysis of their building? Are there websites that they can check? Are there
No? The honest answer, Neil, is that there isn't. I mean, well, there are always. It's always possible to do a little bit of online research, if you like. But if one is talking about, for example, a lease, then that lease is a contractual document, and that should be available somewhere. And I think what I would suggest is that for businesses, and of course it may be more challenging for smaller businesses, but for bigger businesses this may be slightly easier. If they could delegate or indeed empower someone, okay, we'd like you to be the kind of property person on the ground who can just pull together. Okay, that's the lease. Okay, that's the planning permission. Okay, this is the cost of the property in terms of outgoings, which covers energy costs, which covers business rates. Let's just pull that data all together and keep it on a file. So there's nothing formulaic as such, but you're looking at those aspects of data that have cost implications. But also aspects of data that present opportunities. Is there expansion land with the property? If it's industrial, for example, where you can, expand into that expansion land to give greater capacity. And in terms of offices, well, okay, we're into freehold and leasehold. It's each case on its merits. There's nothing formulaic about this, Neil. It's a question of looking at each case on its merits and formulating a strategy from there.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions in the room? If anyone has any questions, obviously you have Robert's email address and contact details on there. Anyone who's in the room is welcome to drop him a line to get one of those free 15-minute sort of deep dives into a specific question. But if we don't have any further questions, we'll wrap it up. And do you have a question for yourself, Robert? Is this?
It's more of an observation, Neil. I mean, I've counted through quickly at a high level, quite a lot of stuff which has a significant amount of importance to it on consideration and on reflection. But my suggestion, so it's not a question obviously, but my suggestion is that there are I think 5 questions that are posed there, and maybe a starting point is for the businesses in the room, and indeed for any business, to reflect on those 5 questions, and actually a sheet of paper, write down the answers to those questions, because that will help you. It's a bit like writing a business plan. Some people don't write business plans. They say they have it in their head. The best way forward is always to have a written business plan. And in the same way, it's the best way forward in order to take informed decisions about property and around property is to have things written down. And a starting point is to answer those 5 questions. because that will reveal gaps in knowledge or not, as the case may be. Again, each case on its merits.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, Robert. That was really insightful and useful. Thank you. And obviously, I'm Neil at neilcocker.com. If anyone has any suggestions for future events, Robert, you can contact Robert at chapmanandco.com. You can see his email address and contact details there. And yeah, we'll wrap up there. And thank you. Oh, actually, there is a hand up. I don't know if that is.
Hello, that's me. Yeah.
Oh, it's you, Daniel. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just a little bit reserved there. That's all.
That's all right. No worries.
I won't dominate this. Only a couple of minutes now. I'll just share an observation for me. I'm definitely keen on catching up with Robert on a one-to-one beyond this to get a bit more sort of specific, in-depth guidance really on where my business is, but really as a brief summary as to where we're at. Essentially, I've come into this family business as part of our succession planning, as the owners aren't too far away from retiring, and they've managed to get the business to a fantastic condition. But arguably, a lot of our strategy has been very much through intuition, instinct, and experience, rather than an articulated sort of strategic growth plan. So what I've found, broadly speaking, throughout the business really is this sort of almost chaos, really, sometimes sort of sold as agility. But respecting my father and my uncle, we've got the business to where I'm here now to make sure that we bring the knowledge in and we make some real composed, well-informed plans going forward. So we lead our growth rather than growth leads us. So that's very much the spirit that we're looking now at the property. But where I'm at in terms of our operations, I mean, out of the 35 guys we got 13 that are office based, but our office capacity is 7. That's how much we can cover right now. But I'm kind of at the point now where my owners realize that I'm here with the support of our non-executive director, who's also our Accelerator Growth Program relationship manager. I really want to bring the education into it now before we make yet another decision around property that is driven by this reactivity, this sort of short-term thinking, because we've outgrown several times over the past few years. And yeah, I really need to understand a bit more about setting up, as it's been mentioned by Robert there, setting up the idea that property forms a significant part of our strategic plans rather than just a stopgap, because we're becoming a bit of a hermit crab of a business, and I need to stop that. So yeah, it's been insightful, it's been fantastic. But Robert, I'll certainly catch you up on that 15 minutes without a doubt, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, just Neil, if I may, just as a response to that, Daniel, thank you for that observation and very articulately put, if I may say so. I'm just looking back to a piece of research which was part of clearly the research and preparation I did for this talk, and here you go. It's a quote. "I suggest that a lack of property knowledge is a false economy, and as a consequence, leaders and decision makers tend to react to property rather than control it." And I think that's really key. Being able to proactively control property in the way that one wants to develop and expand, as opposed to just reacting. And I've come across so many situations and instances, it's just untrue, where businesses have reacted, and they've reacted to their detriment.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, thank you for today. I appreciate that. And I will send something over. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. We hope that was very useful for everyone. And obviously, if you can make direct contact with Robert if you need to. But other than that, it's I've put links in the chat to upcoming events and how to stay on top of those. Otherwise, thanks everyone, and see you all very soon. Robert, I'll drop you an email shortly. Yeah, sure. And thanks everyone. Appreciate it. Speak to you very soon. Cheers.
Cheers.